Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something that we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today is education hour, so we turn off after the first hour, and the educators get to talk amongst themselves for a couple hours. Then we'll turn it back on again, and Emily Russo, our host for today, will actually be showing us tips and tricks in Google Slides. We've spent the last 3 weeks talking about Keynote. Now we're starting to spread the love around, and so we'll be talking about Google Slides today. So stay tuned for that. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to the host, Emily.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. Just a quick reminder, you drive our show, so make sure that you're putting those questions into Mukana and voting on them, because that's important as well. And let's go ahead and get started with our first question today.
Thanks, Emily. The first question today comes from Eddie Scott in Mission Viejo in California. And he asks, is there a missing manual for the Flow 8? The Getting Started guide is quite light on details.
Roscoe?
I'm in the same boat. There isn't a good document, but Carl did a wonderful demo for us. And so I put the link into Carl's demo, and then I put in the other thing I do is on YouTube, I find if people are willing to talk over 20 minutes on a product, they probably actually know something. So I put in 2 links. First, I would go to Carl. He really did an outstanding job of going through all the features of the Flow 8. Obviously, we could document that or write it down at some point. And then secondarily, those other YouTube links.
Cool. All right. Next question.
The next question comes from Alex Lindsay in Novato, California. And he asks, does Keynote have a boolean function?
John.
So I did some quick Googling this morning, and I found that it does support Boolean functions, although I don't know your use case, so I don't know if these particular functions would be useful. I'll post a link to the article in the Mukana.
Alex?
So I did a Cochrane. I threw the pass to myself. So I want to thank, but I do want to thank one of our producers, Stefan Lindholm in Finland. So after seeing our video, he sent me a little tip that was useful. So I thought I'd show it really quickly. So let me cut to this here. So here's what you can do in Keynote to make that happen. If we go into, let's say I build a shape, I'll build a circle here, and we'll make it a little bit bigger so everybody can see it. And then I'm going to change this color just so we know which one is which. So we'll turn that to red, and then we can add another shape, and we'll snap this in, and I'm going to make it bigger like this. And now I'm going to select those two, and if I go to Format under Shapes and Lines, you'll see Unite, Interact, Subtract. So if you do Subtract, boom, that's a shape. And now if we want to have a little bit more fun, if I select these, I can see where their midpoints are by looking at this, and I hit Command R, and that's going to show the rulers. And I'm going to come down here, and I'm simply going to bisect these so that we know exactly where that edge is, or where that center is. Now I'm going to build a square, and I'm going to put it here and down to here so that it overlaps there. I'm going to select the circle that I just cut the center out of and go back to Format, go to here and say, I want to intersect. Boom. So there we have, that there. And now I looked at this. I think that what Mr. Fenwick was asking for earlier is if I copy this and then I do the same thing, and I do a Format, and I do an intersect shapes, and then I paste it back in, and then let's make this one let's say dark blue. We'll send that. No, I won't use the keystroke there. I'll send it to the back. So now you have one piece here. Now what I can do here is I can copy this again. This will seem silly here in a second, but I'm going to send that all the way to the back. Now I'm going to take this one, and I'm going to set it to no fill, which doesn't look like it did anything, but I'm going to select this one. And now I'm going to go in here and make a group. So now I have the center in the section here. So if I hold this down, I can rotate it around like this. And you can, if we go into Animate and go to Action, Rotate, you can see that this is now I can say I want this to go clockwise by, let's say 360 degrees, couple rotations, hit preview. Anyway, so that's I thought that was a pretty ninja suggestion from Stefan of telling us that the booleans work, and the booleans seem to work. Not only do they work extremely well. So again, that's under a format, and so there we go. That's all.
Very cool trick. Yeah. Love it. All right, next question.
Alfredo Tigolo from Inglewood, California asks, how are we doing as a nation, by which he means the United States, in training the next generation of audio and video professionals?
Nigel.
Yeah, by some estimations, there are about 100,000 people in the US working in audio video professionally, and we need about 200,000. So I think the answer is fairly poorly. It's a significant challenge. It's not taught well. It's not communicated well. And while lots of us are starting to invest in training, the reality is we're going to have to find smarter ways to solve that problem. We're going to have to use automation. We're going to have to use intelligence, because I don't think we'll ever put enough people on the field to actually play the game that we're playing it today.
Alex?
I think that we need to give kids in school more opportunities to learn how to do this. So I think that beyond the other bits and pieces, I think that kids should be building videos and live streams and all kinds of other stuff. A lot of them are learning it on their own. My kids know an enormous amount about video production just because they have phones. But as far as understanding these things, there's no reason why someone couldn't start to learn these and I've taught 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds, and they learn just as fast as adults. Like there's nothing here that requires heavy math or deep understanding of a lot of other things. They'll learn it just as fast, and then they know it. And then what we end up with is a large number of people who can communicate very effectively at 18 when they leave high school, not after a bunch of other things. And it just means that they, if they go into college, they have that many other advantages, but it also puts them on a path to supporting this. Because I think 100,000 or 200,000 is a very small number. My guess is it's much larger than that. And I think it would be larger if there were more people. There's literally a constraint the constraint of supply is constraining the demand because basically there's not enough people to do these things well. So people find other ways to do it, and they try to do it an easy way because there's just not enough people to do it.
So I have 2 questions to follow that up. First one is programs like Full Sail. In the past, working with on the outside looking in. So my husband works in audio and production, and looking in, the Full Sail people came in with a lot of theory knowledge, but hands-on, they weren't great and they didn't follow through. And it was like, there was a disconnect between what they knew and what they needed to know through experience. Whereas most of the guys that I've met through the audio world came up in a apprenticeship kind of way. Like they were interested, someone took them in under their wing, they learned more, they started touring. And so my first question is, there's a question about like, is Full Sail becoming more legitimate because of COVID? Because now there's this program that they're going through, and they're recognizing the shortfalls of it. And then the second part of my question to you guys is, with COVID, do you think that there's going to be a gap? So like the older guys that were closer to retirement, or people, but majority male, are, like left and went to go do, had packed it up. They're like, we're done with touring, waiting 2 years is too much. And then the younger people didn't get involved because that wasn't a good way to go. So is there going to be like a gap of knowledge? Anyone?
I guess I would argue that there's no reason for there to be a gap if we just started putting more people. You just have to. There is a supply thing, and to your point, I think everything in this area is the apprenticeship process is much more effective. But that's why I think you start at 10. When we started with apprentices, people were doing it because you look at how many football players are really, really good, and it turns out, oh, their dad was a football player too, which means they were learning when they were 5, not when they were, in high school, or college. They were getting and it's not just that they were getting input. They were getting input from someone who actually understood how to do it because they did it, these were, and so that's why you see a lot of that. And so starting earlier, I think, makes a lot more sense. And then the idea is that if you take doing, this is what we do here, if you take doing with exploration and discussion and digging into those and asking questions, you can accelerate someone's learning a lot, and there's no reason why in a couple of years you couldn't have a lot more people. You just have to have things like what we're doing here more widely available, to the folks, and for students to take into account that, I mean, for schools to be having students shooting all this stuff and working on these things. And I mean, you look at, and Andy Carluccio started, and many other ones like him, and Ben started when they're in high school. They're doing things, and they were doing it. They were doing stage plays. They were doing events. That's how they got good, not by taking classes, like on it, and this is really very much a craftsman's type of project, in my opinion. And we need to figure out ways that we can ramp people up a lot faster and from a lot earlier. That's in my opinion. And so, it's the fact that we have to try to go through schools. Like, the best way to learn how to do broadcast is not to go to Full Sail. It's to get a PA job for NEP. And know that in the next 10 years, you're, for the next first 2 years, you're going to be pulling cables, but you're going to be hearing all the conversations around you. And 10 years later, you'll be cutting shows in the truck, and those guys have done all of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's what my husband did. Like 13, 14,
Yep.
started working with a company local, and then by 18 was touring with Fish. So
In our business, that's the game.
Yeah. All right. Todd.
First of all, I wanted to answer this because Alfredo, I was born in Inglewood, California. I think I might be the only person on the panel who could say that one. But, oh, look at your cat, Alex. And
Grabbing onto my leg, and I was like, okay.
So I was coming at this question just a little bit in a different way. And I think the thing I wanted to contribute was that I teach at a conservatory at the graduate level, and my students come in, and often when they come in, they've had no real training with recording or microphones or anything else. So my job is to teach them performing with electronics, which is essentially what I do. It's about handling their own amplification systems. And I'm proposing to my school that we begin to deal with photography and filming each other, and also streaming. So I guess what I have to say is, for all of you folks who might have friends who teach in music schools, I think it's a great thing to encourage those faculties and encourage those departments to begin creating programs inside their school which allow the official AV teams to interface with students on some level. Because as musicians and actors and everything else, we all need second gigs in this artistic economy, which is difficult. And it's so, especially coming out of grad school, sometimes people need gigs. And boy, I have a few of them that I could push right into a pipeline of apprenticeship if it existed, to make some great money working with you all to support their artistic habit as they go along and try to get work in that domain as well.
Guy?
Yeah, I think it comes down to great teachers that create that spark. I look back at when I was in high school, and I had a great photography instructor, and he allowed me to have access to some of the better gear, the hot lights, the 4x5 camera, some of the advanced dark room stuff. And it was amazing. Like it made me want to go do more. And so I think finding those kids that have that spark, that really want to do more, giving them more access. So the example now is, I got an email saying, we need broadcasters to cycle through the sports stuff. And so I told my son about it, and we went, and I helped out. But they just chew them up and spit them out. I mean, they just rotate the kids around, and they didn't treat them like they were any different for those who did better jobs at framing, and didn't give them a whole lot of coaching. So I think it really comes down to the instructors creating that spark and that vision that, hey, you can do cool stuff, and here's access to better gear as you treat the lower end gear well, and have access to just better and better stuff, better tools.
Alex?
In Rwanda, I mean, we had, a lot of the gear, and it was really what really trained folks was me going down and really walking them through it, and having them and directing shows with them, even though they didn't have a lot of experience. We just were like, we're going to figure this out, and we're going to, but finding the ones, as Guy talked about, finding the ones that were the best at cutting shows or camera work or whatever, and giving them more and more responsibility, and eventually hiring them to do that. And between myself and then Ryan Tudhope, who runs the school down there, or runs the technical part of the school down there, you have people who worked in broadcast for a long time that are guiding them. I think one of the hardest part you have in school is that you have folks that never really did it, trying to teach people how to do it, which is again why, even one of the things we've talked about is just supporting people who are supporting the kids, so a discussion group like this for the teachers, so we can talk about what they want to be thinking about and giving them guidance as well.
All right, next question.
Jill Hill from Wilmington, Delaware says, Roland just announced the release of the UVC02, a web presentation device that mixes audio and can output web video to Zoom. What do you think of it?
David.
Well, in looking at it, I think it lowers the barrier to entry as opposed to some of the rigs we've built here over the past 2 years. I'd love to see them get into the C-suite and up the game for some of the folks that I'm dealing with, and it puts the power in their hand. A little bit of customization, and there's one other feature that looks pretty cool, because if you want to expand, there's the Aerocast app that allows you to start bringing iOS devices in wirelessly. So I'd say a win for Roland.
Chris?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting device. Although I'm kind of, the more I look at it, the more I kind of start thinking about like who is actually going to use this and how. And I start to feel like it's going to be one of those devices where you think, oh, this is great. This is going to kind of do everything. And then once you get it, you quickly outgrow it. And but for the price and what you get, you can't get a capture card and an audio interface separately for much cheaper than that. So I think it's a good bang for the buck. I think they made some curious choices about, the mic position is really set up for a gooseneck. And then, but like it's kind of an entry level device, and now you're like an entry level person needs to figure out, well, where do I get a gooseneck and what gooseneck do I get? And that's kind of a specialty product for it. So I'm interested by it, but I'm not too sure how far it's going to go.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, it's great for setting up one button Zoom room or Teams room or something like that. I think if you got it for home use, you're hooking up your camera, whatever, sitting around on the floor or whatever, you might run into problems there, especially because they're showing like a Canon camera. I know with the GoPro, if you try to hook up, especially the GoPro 9 or the GoPro 10, you actually have to go around the camera and hit a couple buttons before it even starts to stream. Otherwise, people are going to have dirty feeds rather than clean video coming into whatever Teams, Zoom, or whatever device that they have. And the app itself, I'd love to see how that app works, the Aero app, because I don't see any buttons on the device that can control the Aero app. So how is that working? How is that bringing video in? Do you have to go into Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever and actually change the camera to make it work? Or, because like I said, that's a little bit unclear on how that works. So in the right hands, it'll be a great one button push device. In the wrong hands, of course, not so much.
John?
Yeah, the biggest thing I see missing, or at least not mentioned in what I've been able to find online, is around latency compensation. So if you're plugging a camera and a microphone into it, if you have no way to control that latency, then you can end up looking worse than just going directly into a camera, into a capture card.
TJ?
It does have what looks to be a standard XLR input, so it's not just set up for the gooseneck that they offer for that one. So I don't know what the mic input preamps are like on that, but they do show it plugged into an SM58.
All right, let's go to the next question.
The next question comes from John Pewitt in Huntersville, North Carolina. And he asks, yesterday I was on a Zoom call that would not launch the Zoom app, but only would allow the participants to use the web app. What happened there?
Roscoe?
I don't really know, because I thought that was just, I put in the document from Zoom that says allow you to always join from browser. It's actually a setting the user can set. I didn't know that the admin could necessarily set it for all the users. So, but if that's the case, then I believe the admin had it set to force everyone to always use a browser when they launched the meeting.
John?
Yeah, this was very peculiar. A colleague set up a meeting, and instead of going into a standard Zoom meeting, it went into a conference call, a Zoom conference. But I've been on Zoom conferences before at our company, and I've always allowed you to go in through the app. And in this particular case, everybody was on the panel automatically, and everybody was complaining because they were all having to use the web app. And so I was just wondering if anybody had seen that before, because that was a very peculiar, and this particular colleague of mine has set up meetings before, and they've been regular Zoom meetings.
Alex?
He didn't know what was going on.
Did he try to join from an app?
He was joining from his work computer, so no, I would say he was trying to join from the app as well. We have a little Zoom integration with Outlook, and we use that.
Because sometimes with some of these with some platforms, how you join, like if you join with a phone, when you set it up as go to webinar used to have this problem. If you join from a phone, it didn't actually start the meeting, like if the owner did. So you have to. So it may be how he did it. It also, I think, back to what David was talking about, from a security perspective, I believe there is a way to turn it off, so to force everybody to a web page, and that might have been bit might have been flipped. That's a security measure to make sure that it just makes sure that nobody is providing any of the app access or app information, because the app does absorb a lot of data.
All right, next question.
Tlaloc Miguel Lopez Waterman in Galisteo, New Mexico says the iOS Zoom app has the option to turn off incoming video in a meeting, but not in webinar, it seems. Might it be cool to have a button to listen to webinars in radio mode?
David?
Well, speaking from the enterprise viewpoint, I think the webinar is intended for the all hands type meeting where you're supposed to be paying attention and watching, etc. I'm not sure of the feature that Tlaloc is talking about. I know in webinar on the desktop, I can turn off incoming video and it's virtually a radio broadcast on that way, but I don't see that as being something really applicable to webinar, but that's my opinion.
John?
So there are different options on whether you allow or disallow the turning off of video at the admin level within Zoom. And then I think if you're joining from an iOS app, as long as you are not have the Zoom app as in focus, then it shouldn't be sending the video there.
Lois?
I am wondering if webinars allow people to join by just by a telephone. I know we can do that in meetings. That might be one way for him to get what he wants.
David?
Right, and just remember, there is the car safe view. So if you swipe left, you'll just have the one big button. But that's in meeting, not webinar. Never mind. Sorry.
Alex?
No, I was going to say the same thing, but I guess that's only in meetings too. But I listen all the time, but I think I just go out of focus. It won't send video if you're not showing it to the screen. So if you put it behind in the back end, it'll just play out the audio.
All right, next question.
Andre Dole from Berlin says, I recently had big trouble with customers' network security, which nearly prohibited the Zoom webinar. So I really need a backup and bonding solution. Is LiveU Solo a good choice? Budget is as low as possible.
John?
I have not used the LiveU, but I've used the Teradek and Cradlepoint solutions in the past. And those can be a decent option in a pinch. I also try to get on site a couple days before an event and just make sure everything is all set from a network perspective before I kind of go live.
Jeffrey?
I've had to deal with this for a long time before Zoom even was around, where I would go into enterprise solutions and do some live streaming, and they'd block every single port. So bringing in a solution like a LiveU was always the answer. You might want to test it in the area that you're going to be going in, because especially if you're going into the building and deep into the building, because that could become problematic with streaming out from LiveU. Also talk with the IT people and see if there's a way that they maybe some even have a secondary internet that goes for guest solutions and things like that, that doesn't touch into their network, that will allow you to do what you need to do. But a lot of times it's all about that port being blocked for any type of streaming protocol.
Guy?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, you just got to do exactly what Jeff said, talk to people ahead of time. But I think you might be confusing the devices, Andre. Like the LiveU Solo is a device that is for video to be sent. I think what you're talking about is you were trying to produce a Zoom video and you needed internet to be able to stream. And so there's this that requires a service up in the cloud that packages an HDMI or an SDI signal and rebonds it back together over cellular, Ethernet, or Wi-Fi. So this can do four different devices, but it's not going to save the day in the case that you're referring to. You would want something else, maybe a PEP link or something like that that could bond internet. So this is taking video. It's not giving you bonded internet. It's just sending up the video signal into different segments and combining those packages back together up at a server, which is another $350 a year. So if you just get the device, that's $1,000, and then $1,350 is the other part of it. So depending on how you're doing the webinar, I mean, you might be combining it up in, like we use vMix in the cloud. So maybe you're doing your conversation up there, and you might want to use a different type of way of getting the video up, like SRT, so you can maybe tunnel through some of that stuff that's a firewall. So just lots of testing. That's all I could say.
Alex?
Yeah, the biggest problem with the LiveU will be probably latency. So LiveU is going to have 1 to 5 seconds of latency depending on how you set it up for the bonding to solve. The problem with bonding is that you end up with jitter. So if you're trying to stream, it's fine. That'll be fine. If you are trying to do a two-way communication with low latency WebRTC, you're going to end up with drop frames and some other, possibly errata that occurs from bonding. The best solution that we've seen so far, if you're not able to get on the corporate network, is now the new 5Gs, especially in Europe, are pretty effective. We're doing one tomorrow. I think we tested at 160 down and 90 up. And so the 5G stuff is starting to look pretty promising as far as a backup. That's our third option behind a fiber and then an air link, and then if all else fails, we'll have a 5G. So those are things to look at, and what everybody else has said is important. The first thing you want to ask is, if you're in a corporate environment, the first thing that you want to ask is can we talk to the IT department and figure out how they can make rules that are only for that port, only for that day, only for that, there's a whole bunch of things they can do. It just takes time, and you're not the only problem that they have. So giving them time to do it. And then especially if you have C-level that are going to show up, usually you have a little juice if you just don't overuse it. And if they have time, plus there's pressure to put high level folks on, usually you can get it done.
Great. All right. Next question.
Our next question comes from Lois Richter in Davis, California, and she asks, what is ducking?
TJ.
Ducking is a term for audio whereby you can have either two audio sources or multiple audio sources or multiple audio devices, where when one device starts making noise, it lowers the volume of the other device or the other channel. So you can think of it as one audio stream ducks underneath the other one.
All right. Nigel.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. I first came across ducking, what is depressingly 40 years ago, when I worked for the BBC, and they had a device on the desk, and most of the desks where I worked were actually built by the engineers rather than bought. They had auto ducking, but the latency of the auto ducking was so poor that people would manually duck the music underneath their voice when they were doing things like voiceovers. What was interesting about the BBC desks in those days is they started at the top and went down, rather than most desks today start at the bottom and go up. So when you were ducking yourself, you were actually pushing the fader away from yourself. And I've always struggled now doing it the other way around, because that seemed to make more sense to me.
Yep. Muscle memory. All right. Next question.
Andre Doles from Berlin asks, what are good ways to convince executives of the importance of good audio and video in hybrid meetings? Sadly, they often seem to be resistant to suggestions.
John.
I think it really comes down to what's driving them. What do they care about? And can you tie that message into that? It's all about convincing them, whether it's, peer pressure, like this other guy looks a lot better. We want to make sure you look the same if they're participating across different meetings. But it's really just about understanding what drives them and how can you speak to them on their level to understand the importance of what they're trying to deliver.
David?
Be the influencer, not the peacock in the room. So, try to drive things with convincing firmness, but not overblowing it. Like, I'll turn off the lights and stuff when I'm in meetings, but keep the camera and regular lighting going.
Alex?
Yeah. example is a really good way to do it. Another way to do it is generally to show them the current meeting, like whenever you finish the meeting, or here's a meeting that you just did, and here's a great meeting, and sending people like, here's a great example of a virtual meeting. Here's a great example of those types of things. You don't have to say much when they see their meeting against another meeting that it looks a lot better and works a lot better. The hard truth is that a lot of executives get pretty embarrassed by what they've been doing, and then things start to roll.
Todd?
It's either going to sound exceedingly professional or completely unprofessional. But if those things don't work, beer, candy, pastry, find out what they love.
Works with teachers all the time. John?
I've been showing up to meetings looking like this with some C-levels, and usually I get questions about how it works and that kind of stuff. So show up with your best foot forward, and they're going to ask questions.
Jeffrey?
Ultimately, there are some executives that are just going to be completely resistant because they just don't want to have to deal with it, because they're more concerned about running company rather than figuring out how their video and audio is going to work, and they're just going to make you have to live with it. We had a interview 3-4 months back where the CEO wasn't willing to do anything with that. So I've been in this position so many times. The best thing to do is, if this is a very important situation and you are getting paid for this, then find a way to go down there and get in that and get to that executive and set up something like the Roland. That would be perfect for that. But something that's set and forget, so they just push one button and they're good to go, because otherwise they just won't do it.
Nigel?
Okay, if all of this fails, that executive has an assistant, a secretary, an EA, an admin, or someone who they trust. That person will do a better job of explaining to that executive what you want than you ever will do. So find the person closest to the exec who has influence over them and help them.
All right, next question.
Mitchell Hill from Wilmington, Delaware says, anyone else update their Mac to 12.2 with no problem?
Nigel?
Yep, 12.2 on both my Mac Pro 2021 and on my Mac Mini. That's fine. I found that I don't use any complicated audio stuff. I use mostly standard Office stuff, and Final Cut Pro had no problems. I have to tell you, the betas of the iOS devices have been crazy this year. I lost Safari for a while, but I found the Mac quite stable.
John?
I'm running 12.2, and while I have had issues, it's not because of 12.2. I've been having a crashing problem for 12.2, and it seems to crash a lot less frequently after 12.2. So I'm probably going to rebuild my Mac this weekend, and we'll see how that goes. But 12.2 doesn't seem to be the problem. It seems to be more of the solution for me. I still have the orange light issue, but
Jeffrey?
That's what I was going to ask. How is the orange light into play? So got it answered.
All right, next question.
Michael Weber from Foxborough in Massachusetts asks, what is tri-level sync and when should we use this over Blackburst for sync?
Roscoe?
I'm going to go a little basic just to back on. Blackburst or sync is for gen locking or putting all the cameras in the same timing treasure. So if I use the conductor analogy, the conductor will, run his beat and all the instruments in the orchestra know exactly when to hit their notes. The problem is tri-level sync solves two problems. One is, what if the conductor can only go this fast, but the music is going this fast? But tri-level is a higher frequency than Blackburst, so you want to use it in the digital era with SDI. It's just a better syncing. And then the other thing is, if the conductor can only go up with his baton, tri-level sync can go both down and up with its baton, so it can give a signal that can be more easily interpreted. I'll stop there.
Alex?
Yeah, exactly what Roscoe said. You want to use tri-level if you can. Blackburst will work otherwise. This will reduce also the latency going into the switcher, because when all the cameras are coming in with their frames locked together, the switcher doesn't have to even them all, figure out, time them all together. So you may lose up to a frame by doing that, which knocks out your more further knocks out your audio sync and so on and so forth. But yeah, and the frequency of the tri-level, I think of it as resolution, just a higher resolution tracking system.
All right, next question.
Our next question is from Alfredo Tigolo in Inglewood, California. Which introduction level audio sound mixer brand would you recommend with 8 channels?
John.
Nothing better than the Flow 8 if you can get it. Sweetwater. They don't say whether or not it's stocking out. I don't know if it is or not, but this is a great value for the money. This is a great unit.
All right, Jeffrey.
The one thing about the Flow 8 that you saw there was it only has 4 XLR inputs. And if you need something that's going to have multiple inputs other than patching cables and adapters and things like that, you'll want to get to the Behringer X12 or something like that. But it really depends on what you want to accomplish with your mixer. Do you want to do Dante on it? Do you want to? Are you just trying to figure out how mixers work? For that, there are some older mixers that you can get. Alesis has the has some mixers, and of course the older Behringer mixers, perfect from there. Don't hesitate using an analog board, because sometimes you learn more from the analog board before you, and then of course that'll move over to the digital board. You'll be able to do a lot more.
Chris?
Yeah, so if you want like basic, I've been happy with the Mackie mixers, and so you can get the Mackie Pro FX 12, which has almost 8 XLR inputs. It's got a USB. It's $350. It's a basic analog mixer. Will get you almost as many channels as you need. The step up would probably be something maybe like the XR from Behringer. If you get into the digital, but then you're starting to lose manual faders if you want those. And if you need more XLR inputs, the Soundcraft UI16 is a little up from the Behringer in terms of inputs, but it's a web interface versus app interface, and it's just a little different and a little more expensive. So there's a couple options that have a lot of inputs for you.
Alex?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you're what you're jumping into and what cost. For us, the Flow 8 is a great one. I haven't used it, but a lot of people here are really happy with it. There is a huge difference, in my opinion, between the XR18 and the XR12. And so if I was going to go up, the XR12, you're going to hit a ceiling really fast, where the XR18 is going to give you a little bit more room to work. And then after that, depending on how deep you want to go for someone to begin, there's the X32. All of these are Behringers. I have to say that under about $4,000, $5,000, my whole life is all Behringer, and then the next step up for that is Yamaha, and the next step up for that is usually some of the bigger mixers after that. But Yamaha gets us up to about $40,000. So anyway, those are but we're kind of Calrec is probably the one that we go, once we go over $40,000, we start going to Calrecs. And so those are the kind of the gear shifts for us, at least.
Guy?
Yeah, a lot of good recommendations on the regular sound mixers, and I started to think of this question as more of, do you want to record as well? So for under $1,000, I'd be looking at the Zoom F8N, and then I noticed in our warehouse that we had a bunch of these refurb sound devices, MixPre 10Ms. If you don't need time code, it's another mixer, 12 tracks for $949. So between those two, I mean, those are the brands that I trust, Zoom and sound devices.
All right, next question.
Our next question is from Nigel Dessau in Austin, Texas. For someone who wants to get into photography, what's the best camera for sub $1,000?
Chris?
So I think this is kind of a loaded question. I think the best camera for sub $1,000 is probably your phone. If you want to get into photography, what you need to do is make a decision on kind of your ecosystem. And because when you get into the more advanced cameras, it's really about the glass, and the glass is what's going to last you much longer. And so thinking about whether you want to go into a Sony or a Canon or a Nikon, personally, my suggestion is, for under $1,000, I would go and find your local camera shop and see what they have in the used market. Usually they can get you a pretty decent camera that's a year or two old, that's used, in a lens and a package for that. But I don't know that I would recommend buying a new camera for under $1,000.
Todd?
I got to pass. Chris kind of said it all for me. I will say that I'm looking at you through Sony's all around me, and Sony's have proven really great for me. I used to be a Nikon shooter, and I still am a Nikon shooter, but Sony's been really great for me as well.
John?
So I heard a bit of advice a few years ago that's really been helpful to me, and that is look at what the people around you are shooting with, and talk to them, and if they're willing to let you borrow their glass while you're, not, go home with it, but like while you're out and about, borrow their lenses and work with them, or a local camera club and that kind of stuff. And if you got people around you that are shooting Canon, don't buy a Sony. If you got people out there shooting Nikon, don't buy a Canon or a Sony. I'm a Canon photographer. I like my Canons, but if I was starting out all over again, I would look around and see what people are around me are shooting with, and if I can lean on them for help. And also, they have the cameras and they can help you with yours. So it's not just borrowing stuff, it's the experience. So go with what the tribe around you is using. All the cameras are more or less the same at that level. And you're going to be it's what you can leverage around you. I personally would recommend looking at Canon and Sony, because I think they've got a little bit more of a runway behind them than some of the other brands. But I've got friends that shoot Pentax still. So just go with what the people around you are shooting, and also try the camera. Make sure that it works for your hands. I don't like the way Nikons feel. I like the way Canons feel. But then again, I've been shooting Canon for about 15 years now. So anyway, that's all I got.
Good points. TJ?
All excellent advice. Visit your local camera store, see what your friends or colleagues are using. I'll offer another perspective. Don't be afraid of an all-in-one type of camera. Don't necessarily need to jump into a detachable lens camera right away. If you're just exploring the hobby, a used camera is a great way to go. Find one that's an all-in-one that gives you a decent zoom range, so you can start exploring your creativity. What can you do with that particular camera? Once you outgrow that tool, once you use that tool for a while, you will find it will inform you where you want to go next. Do I need a longer lens? Do I need a wider lens? So before you start making these big purchase decisions, try to use a simpler tool that you know is going to be a tool that is a stepping stone to a more professional or better or more specialized tool later on.
Alex?
My first camera was a K1000 with a 50 millimeter lens, and it was super valuable, to just have a fixed lens that I was stuck with, and I had to move around and make things work and see how it worked. And so I personally would go with something more manual, like like my daughter, we got her a used 50D, Canon 50D, and she's got a 24-70 on it and a 50. And those are the things that she likes to go out and shoot with. And that's just she's 12 years old. She's out there shooting, and she learns how to use the mechanics of the camera. And then a lot of the things on your phone make more sense when you have actually done it with a lens. So those are things. I do think that these days, the phone is pretty powerful, but I think that beyond just the lesson of it, I think that there's just a lot of fun working with the machinery. And so having, the lenses and the things and process. But I would definitely, if someone was starting, depending on what they're doing, I would rent it or buy something used to get started. That's what I got. Mine was old when I got it.
Yeah, I was just thinking, my sister, who's in the film world, she started off with my dad's old camera, and it was broken, and she figured out how to make the brokenness work for her and what she created from it. So
I shot hundreds of photos. I learned how to develop it all too. My uncle had a darkroom, so it was an incredible experience at that, especially at that age, depending on what age you're doing. But analog developing film is amazing. Like, it's just so much fun. I can still smell the Dektol.
Yeah. Guy?
Yeah, I bought one of these based on a question here in office hours last year, a G100 for, I think when I bought it, it was 750 or so, but that camera, when I take stills with it, it's just noticeably soft. I mean, the lens is really not that great. It's a micro four thirds sensor. So when I look at what I've shot with like a Canon full frame, there's just a gorgeousness that you get out of good glass and good sensors. So even if you say, okay, I'm just going to bite the bullet and go to Costco and go pick up a sub $1,000 camera or Best Buy or whatever, be aware that there's just some settings that are going to be missing. If you are using it for video, you may not get a mic input. You may not get, you may have automatic gain control versus some of the settings to adjust those levels. So just be aware that you're taking away a lot of the pro features when you get under the $1,000 level on these cameras.
All right, next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, I've noticed that many state and local government entities use Verizon in the US for cellular service and not AT&T or T-Mobile. Why could that be?
David.
I think the primary one is security. Most of the phones provided by Verizon don't have SIMs, so the device is locked to carrier. The other one is coverage. I live in Manhattan, and I miss my Verizon account because AT&T is kind of spotty at best.
Jeffrey.
It's simply put down to contracts. When I worked in a state and local government arena, it was all about getting together a panel, figuring out which contract was the best, and then going from there. Here in Wisconsin, we have actually U.S. Cellular is what I believe they're still using, because this is within the state. It's easier to control, and the prices are a little bit better than Verizon and AT&T. But it's really down to what the lawmakers can and cannot do, because there's a lot of restrictions, as David did say, because if you can't give a free phone to a state and government official, because that would be that they get in trouble for stuff like that. So all those contracts, they're scrutinized. It's a tough thing. So Verizon must be doing something really good to keep the state and local government officials happy and customers.
John?
Yeah, like everyone said, it comes down to government contracts and who does that. I will say though, Verizon, I think one of the benefits of them being on CDMA before getting into the new network technologies is they had to go fresh and wipe the board from what they were previously using. And AT&T was able to kind of, just like their DSL connections, was just kind of hobbling on old networks and trying to increase functionality. And I think that really set them behind when it comes to functionality.
Yeah, I was just going to add all the stuff that you guys said, but back when cell phones were new and we moved away from the pager, I was working in a cell phone, working for a cell phone company, and we carried Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile, and Verizon had the best coverage the earliest. So in 2002, you could drive all over New England and have coverage with Verizon. But AT&T, you had spotty coverage at best, only around big cities. And then T-Mobile actually was the one that worked best in rural areas. So flipping through those, I think it was Verizon getting in early and then providing that blanket coverage and using the system, building their system from scratch, as opposed to trying to hobble on to other people's networks and things like that, like AT&T did for a long time. And then I think they saw the niche in the government. And so they did create the government, because there's a whole separate thing for setting up a cell phone contract, or at least in 2002 to 2006, for setting it up for like a government official or even certain businesses like schools and things like that than there was for the general public. Alex?
I know that in the early days, the CDMA was considered much more secure than GSM. So, I mean, much more. And also more scalable per cell tower. So that's why you had better coverage, was because you were able to get more out of every cell tower, and it was considered more, so it was more scalable as well as more secure. And that's why the government, I'm pretty sure, jumped on that. And then after that, it's all inertia. Like once you have a government contract, you have to screw it up before you're going to lose it.
All right. Next question.
Asmuk Gajar from Cape Town, South Africa says, family member started and hosted a Zoom meeting as host with a free account, but kept on hitting the 40-minute limit. I joined the meeting with a paid account and they made me host, but the 40-minute limit was still there. Must a paid account start a meeting so there's no 40-minute limit?
John?
I think everything comes off whoever is creating the meeting. That's going to create the rules for the meeting. I mean, if you want to, you would have to create a new meeting as you as host. I mean, you could then delegate host to other people, then they could start the meeting. But I even believe, at least when it comes to webinar accounts, even if you were a delegate, the actual original creator has to start the meeting in order for all the functionality to be there.
Guy?
Yeah, it's an account basis. So whoever owns the account, that will determine if it's going to be a 40 minutes. So if it's a free account and it's hosted by that person, you can't get around it, except actually there is one little trick. So the Zoom rooms, if you bring in a Zoom room, you'll see a little message that'll display. It'll say this meeting has been upgraded to unlimited minutes. So it's a little trick. If you know somebody with a Zoom room, you can bump up those, and it'll bump the resolution too.
Hasmuk?
Yeah, this was a service for a 84-year-old cousin who passed on. So we had family all over the globe participating, and it was quite awkward. Actually, every 40 minutes they had to restart the meeting. So eventually I started the meeting like John has said, and I sent the link, and that's how we maintain. The other thing I could do was obviously make sure everybody is muted, because the previous two meetings most people were unmuted, and it was quite awkward, very awkward. So 2 lessons learned from that.
Roscoe?
So a recurring meeting is something that you can set up. So you set up a recurring meeting, and then you assign that other people, either you can make it so that anyone joining the meeting can basically use it without a waiting room or whatever. They can kind of or you make sure that you have co-hosts that are assigned to it. But a recurring meeting can be set up and anyone then can use it to start a longer meeting.
And Lois?
I think the biggest problem with this and a lot of other things is that the word host means 2 different things, and a lot of people get that confused. The host right now in this particular webinar is me, but I'm not the one who created the meeting, and the host who created the meeting is also called host. So,
Jeffrey?
One important thing to keep in mind, if you do create a recurring meeting and you are the host to that, if you have another meeting that's in conflict, you could end that first meeting by joining the second meeting, just so you know.
All right, next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, when I applied to a major truck company apprenticeship program, they rejected me because of lack of experience, despite a background in the IT world. As we move towards an IT-centric future, should we look to the IT world to recruit new people?
Alex?
The bottom line is most people are looking for a very specific set of things, like you have done this thing, and it just may be that specific job, but they need to know that you've already done that thing in exactly the way that they're looking for it. So that's the hard part with any job. I mean, and it gets more and more specific as we keep moving forward. And I think this is part of the gap that we're seeing between jobs that are available and people filling those jobs, is that some of it people aren't interested, but also that you have an issue where companies want something very specific, because especially in IT, you can screw a lot of things up really quickly. Not only saying you, but someone can. And so that's the thing that they worry about, is someone without experience going, oh, I'm going to pull this out, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to change this script, or I'm going to change the whatever. And it can have, cost millions and millions and millions of dollars. And so usually they're trying to make that not happen.
All right, next question.
Stefan Lindholm from Åbo in Finland says, there doesn't seem to be a way to use blend modes, multiply, screen, overlay, etc. in Keynote. Is this something that might be coming, or is it too advanced a feature to be hoping for?
Roscoe?
Well, I thought you'd let Alex go first. Okay, so the way I look at it, there really isn't levels like you have in Photoshop. It's objects. Each object can, but they do have, you can set opacity, you can set various characteristics on individual objects. So in some ways I consider that a blend mode, although it doesn't have the traditional layers you might think of.
Alex?
It does not, but there's this feature inside of Keynote. It's really important. It's called Provide Keynote Feedback. Circling that over and over again. I can only say it once. I can only send that when we can all send it only once, but all of us can send it in, because that is a something that I ask for about once a year. So like, hey, I would really like the blending modes, even simple ones. And so if all of us, anybody watching here, go into Keynote, always remember, if you have like a little thing that tickles you that is you wish it was better, there is a send feedback, and I probably send 3 or 4 things a week to the team. I don't know how much, but I think I have heard that if a lot of people vote on something, they definitely pay more attention to it. So I would encourage you to go and ask for blend modes. All right.
It definitely works that way in Google. So I assume Apple would probably do the same thing. But I used to tell teachers that all the time. I'm like, you see that little button? Push it, give feedback.
Yeah. And
because they won't build it. They can't read your mind.
I think at some point we need to make a list and then we have feedback parties where all of us, we just send someone, because, that's what happened with Universe is Universe got more requests to work with Liminal than they had gotten all combined. They got it in 15 minutes from us. They got more than they'd had in their company's history. So combined. So and that, got solved in a week.
All right. Next question.
Andre Dollar from Berlin says, which general management tool can the panel recommend? There are so many tasks, mails, and messages to be handled that I lose oversight very quickly. Using PC, Mac, Android, and iOS. Any cost-effective suggestions?
John.
So I was originally going to recommend Things, but then I saw you said Android and PC, and that's not really a solution. So my fallback on that is OneNote. OneNote is available on all those platforms, Mac, PC, iOS, Android, and it's free. And it allows you to send email over to it. It allows you to set up task lists. You can organize different pages to keep track of stuff. And so I really like it. The only thing it doesn't do is send you reminders. But if you diligently check OneNote, that's a great solution for what you're looking for.
Chris?
So I use Todoist, and I've tried the Asana and Trello, and I've messed with all of them. And Todoist is the one that's kind of stuck for me. And one of the reasons I like it is because it can be as simple as just a checklist. You just have a list and check off things as you go. We can get more complicated. You could do the whole GTD workflow. It's got a lot of integrations with it. There's some projects I've had where I've had a lot of identical tasks that had identical subtasks. And I actually used Python and wrote a quick script that just generated 150 to-do items right into it immediately. And now my project's set. So it has a lot of hooks into if you Gmail and things like that, there's a lot of easy ways to get tasks into it. And it can be as complicated or as simple as you want. So yeah, I like Todoist.
All right. Next question.
Sam Greenwood from Toronto asks, where do I go to purchase Unity Comms headsets outside of the US?
David.
I did a little quick Googling on their most expensive headset. There's a thing that says for orders outside the US, please email orders@unityintercom.com for custom invoice and shipping info. Thank you.
Nice. All right. Next question.
RJ Rod from Winnipeg, Manitoba asks, what are the current working from home recommendations for 1 or 2 channel XLR-USB audio interfaces, particularly for an MV7 microphone? I see Focusrite, Steinberg, PreSonus, and Roland models locally available currently. MixPres and Flow 8 not locally in stock.
David.
Well, my early entry to office hours, I was recommended the Shure X2U. It's a single XLR to USB audio interface with headset return. It was pretty solid. I'm still using it for headset now. But yeah, $100, good stuff.
John?
Focusrite is what I use. It's sort of in my go bag for almost any situation. At home, I have an Apollo Duo. I really love the preamps and that, and the ability to enter DSPs in real time and then get that feedback in your headset.
Alex?
I still use an X2U. I have it in my backpack. That's like one of the things like I just have as a backup if I can get something connected. The other one that I've been testing, I have a lot of interfaces, but the one that I've been testing I'm pretty happy with is also the Revelator from PreSonus, the IO24. Right here you have software control over it, and it's a great little package. And so this is another one. Remember that the MV7 doesn't need it. It has its own USB interface, but if you're adding more to it, those are some great suggestions, all of them.
Roscoe?
Alex mentioned, yeah, the MV7 in front of me has a USB interface already. But secondarily, just real quick on the Flow 8s, they're only available from Sweetwater because Behringer had something go on, and that there's really only one distributor right now in the United States. Maybe there's 2 or 3, but Sweetwater is the place they are in stock. I'll stop there.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our first hour. We did it again. Good job, everyone. Look forward to this part of the day. Right about now, we're going to say goodbye to our YouTube crowd. If you want to get in on the educator